What's up, everyone? Welcome back to the See-Through Podcast, a podcast that creates transparency on disabilities and the champions with them. This is episode 49, and just like the other episodes, I'm the host. I'm Lance Johnson, and I live, create, and podcast from Brooklyn, New York, with an inherited retinal disease called retinitis pigmentosa, or RP for short. If you're a new listener, thanks so much for checking this podcast out. My guest today is Stephen Verdile, a talented graphic designer living with spinal muscular atrophy. Stephen is also based in New York City, and when he's not designing for NBC Universal, he's creating original content for the Squeaky Wheel, which is a satirical news website bringing you stories for disabled people by disabled people. And if you're not sure what a satirical news website is, you may be familiar with websites like Clickhole or The Onion, which is a personal all-time favorite of mine. But the Squeaky Wheel prides themselves on their hot takes, investigative stories, and creative perspective, and all of their content is centered around the disability community. In this episode, Stephen and I run over some of his headlines he's written for the Squeaky Wheel. We talk about where his sense of humor and inspiration comes from for these articles. We talk about job interview accessibility as a wheelchair user and much, much more. This episode is truly a fun one, and I'm so hyped for everyone to hear it. But before we dive into the interview, make sure to follow or subscribe to this podcast on the platform you're currently listening on. Also, make sure to follow the See-Through Podcast on social media. You can find the podcast by using the handle at See-Through-Pod, and that works for Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok. I'm also on Facebook as well. And with that shameless plug out of the way, how about we get to the real reason you're here? Here's episode 49 with Stephen Verdile. All right, man. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
I just moved into a new apartment, and you're the first guest in this new apartment, and it feels kind of weird. I feel kind of out of my element here. But what I want to say is you're also located here in New York City, right?
Yep. I live right in Hell's Kitchen, not too far from you. And I've been here for a few years now, and I love living in the city.
I saw online that you're from New York.
Yes. So I was born and raised in Long Island.
Okay.
And then I went to school, and I lived in the dorm in Queens. And then when I graduated from college, I moved into Manhattan just to be near my job and sort of get to live the New York City life.
Awesome. I'm always fascinated when I meet people who are actually from New York.
Yes. I've been to most parts of it at some point in my life.
Yeah, that's awesome. But yeah, I have a lot of really cool topics that I'm excited to talk with you about. We have a lot to explore.
Absolutely.
You have a lot of interesting things going on. For starters, you are a lot of things, so I won't speak for you. How about that? How about you give everyone a quick intro about yourself?
Sure. So my sort of 9-to-5 job is I work as a designer for NBC Universal. And I've been there since I started as an intern in college, and then transitioned into working there full time after I graduated. I also do a lot of freelance design projects. And most recently, I launched a project that I'm really excited about, which is the Squeaky Wheel.
Yeah, the Squeaky Wheel. That's what caught my eye and what got us talking. Some of you listening may follow the Squeaky Wheel, but for those who aren't too familiar, can you give a little bit about what the Squeaky Wheel is?
Sure. So the Squeaky Wheel is an online satire publication about disability. So really, if you're familiar with The Onion or Reductress or Clickhole, those kind of websites, I created the Squeaky Wheel to sort of be the disability parallel to that. And it's fairly new. It only launched less than 2 months ago. And we're sort of doing a lot of exciting things. I've got some really talented people that reached out to get involved and contribute, which is really exciting. and it's sort of taken off from there.
Yeah, I when I saw it, I was like, oh, this is just like The Onion, and I'm a huge The Onion fan. You know, it's like that type of humor, that like dry satire humor is just like what does it for me. And
absolutely, we love The Onion, and basically that's the biggest compliment we can get is being compared to The Onion, because that was sort of the role model for it.
Yeah, and actually I saw it because a past guest on this podcast, Cardin Wyckoff, she shared it on her Instagram story, and then I was like, oh, that's funny. And then she was like, yeah, you should follow the account. And I checked it out, and that's how I got affiliated with you. So whatever you're doing is working.
Awesome. Thank you, Cardin.
Yeah, and it's obviously material that resonates with people in the disability community. So like what you said is it's kind of satire, but the headlines, like typical Onion headlines that are kind of targeting the disability community culture. Like, for example, like there's a couple headlines I have written down that are, I find to be funny. If you don't mind me reading them, or do you want people to look it up?
You can. Let's hear you read some of your favorites. I'm curious.
Okay. Well, there's one that I really find interesting and I want to talk to you about, because I wasn't aware that this was a thing.
Sure.
That's kind of interesting, right? Like, these are humorous but also educational at the same time. So that's kind of neat, but that's a whole nother topic. But let me read it. It's man solves problem no disabled person actually has with unaffordable invention.
Absolutely. So that one was definitely, I think that was probably our most shared post and one of the most popular ones.
Okay.
And the idea from that really came because every 6 months to a year, I would say, there's an article on either BuzzFeed or Vox or one of those websites that's like, these tech grads created this wheelchair that can climb stairs and go on water and do all these crazy things that are really cool. Like, they're genuinely interesting devices.
Yeah.
And then usually the last sentence of the article is like, but this thing they invented is really just a prototype. Like, it doesn't work. It's not affordable. It can't actually be used in any real application. And it's good in terms of research that people are trying to make better alternatives to some of the devices we use. But I always found it really funny how the media talks about them as if they're like going to be in Walmart tomorrow. And it's nothing like that.
Yeah.
The wheelchair I use is 13 years old now.
Okay.
And it's really not that different than the ones that they sell currently. There really isn't that much advancement in terms of what's actually available and what's affordable and what insurance will buy and things like that.
Okay.
And there's also someone I want to shout out, Liz Jackson, who I've heard her coin the term disability dongle.
Okay.
Which is sort of the idea of like an object or a device that is meant to help disabled people, but was more likely invented by an able-bodied person and probably isn't actually better than what's already available. Because there is a lot of things that fall under that category.
Yeah, that's fascinating. And kind of going beyond just the title, you know, just like The Onion, you go to the website and there's like an article that accompanies each, you know, kind of one-liner title. And
yes.
I'll read the first couple lines from that one, just so people can get a taste and get more of a feel.
Sure.
Bradley Michaels is a budding entrepreneur who recently moved to Silicon Valley in pursuit of the big dream. His most recent invention is called Disability Solved, trademarked, and it aims to solve a problem that he's guessing some people face daily. I learned in business school that successful entrepreneurs solve problems, and no group has more problems than disabled people. They're literally not able to do things. It's right in the name of their demographic group. I know I was onto something by acknowledging their existence.
Yeah, we had a lot of fun writing that one.
Do you write a lot of these, or like you said, you have people you work with?
So I've definitely written sort of the lion's share myself.
Okay.
I think we have about 40 stories, and I think I've written about 30 of the 40 at this time. But we also have a copy editor, Nimi, who is fantastic, and he sort of edited both everything I wrote and everything that some of our newer writers like Leslie and Emmeline have written for us.
Okay. So you're kind of slowly building a team.
Exactly. So if anyone listening wants to write for us, it's all sort of voluntary at this point. I wish we could pay people, but it's one of those things that there's just no budget. It's just for fun and just sort of a passion project.
Yeah.
But if anyone's interested, they can DM the Squeaky Wheel, or they can send an email through the website. And we have people that are just writing one article and that's it. We have other people that are like, can I write an article every month? That's cool too. It's sort of something people can do at their own pace, and something that I'm happy to help with as much or as little, because I know it can be sort of hard to get experience in journalism and in writing if you've never done it before.
Yeah.
So I wanted it to be sort of a platform for both experienced writers and inexperienced writers, just to share their funny experiences with disability.
Okay. Yeah, I like that, the way you're approaching that. So what I find fascinating is that your name, isn't quite attached to this project. You're kind of like this mysterious person behind this that no one really knows. It's probably except you and your friends and people close to you and the people you work with. Is there like a reason behind that?
So initially it started out as one of those things that I'm a big believer in not talking about your projects and not sort of hyping them up until they exist. So I had this idea for a while in my head. I wrote at least 10 or 15 articles before I told anyone at all, and before I had built the website, just to sort of prove my concept. The first person I showed them to was my girlfriend. I was like, I'm thinking of making this account and this website. What do you think? Sort of, do you think people would like it? Then I wrote some posts on Reddit. I'm a big Reddit user, just asking people sort of what kind of content would you want? Do you think this is funny? Do you think that is funny? A lot of people loved it. A lot of people hated it. Sort of really molded it into what is now the website. And I sort of wanted to keep myself off of it just because I think it's funnier if it's like its own entity. The Onion does the same thing where they're sort of not really publicizing who's writing the lines, and I think it's just funnier overall if it feels like a real newspaper, like a real publication that's living and breathing on its own. Yeah,
I agree. And it was interesting because whenever I reached out to the Squeaky Wheel, I didn't know who would respond to me. So
yeah, I actually haven't put it on any of my personal accounts or anything like that, really, because I'm a believer in that, letting it be its own thing.
Yeah.
And trying to not wrap myself up in it too much, just to let it be for whoever it wants to be for.
I respect that.
Yeah. Another thing I could say too about sort of keeping it separate is I think a lot of the articles and a lot of satire in general can be sort of edgy and political, and I wanted to have the freedom to post those things and to speak out against things that I think are not fair and speak out against the injustices.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's a little easier when you're not tying it to a specific person. That way the idea can speak for itself.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you on that. And you should definitely, if you're listening to this, you should go check out the Squeaky Wheel. You're mainly on Instagram, right? But I know you're on Twitter. And
yeah, so Instagram is definitely where most of our followers are at this point. I think Instagram lends itself the best to it because you get that nice headline and the image together.
Yeah.
It's simple. It was sort of how I expected it to grow, and it grew just like that. So I am sort of focused on Instagram, but all the full articles are on the website, and we're also on Facebook and Twitter.
Yeah. And if you're listening, just click the show description. I'll have a link there that will take you to the Squeaky Wheel website as well as to the Squeaky Wheel Instagram account.
Thank you.
And there's a few other headlines I wanted to throw out there just to see.
Go for it, yeah.
There's another one that I just found humorous was wheelchair using bachelor subtly reveals condom during first date to imply that it works.
So that is sort of it's sort of a joke that I've heard in several different places and different stories that people have, but there's basically a big misconception that if you use a wheelchair, that your penis, I guess I can say penis on this.
First time penis has been said on this podcast, and I'm excited.
All right.
I'm excited about that, actually. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a fun word. There's always that misconception that like disabled people don't have sex. Really, if I'm gonna summarize it, overall, it's been popularized in a lot of television and media that disabled people are asexual or can't have sex or aren't interested in sex. And I've seen several almost cringy or awkward attempts from disabled people to be like, no, I do have sex. And it sort of came from that idea of like leaving a condom out purposely, which normally sort of an able-bodied person might be embarrassed by, but a disabled person would do it to sort of go over the top and be theatrical in their announcement of their sex life.
Yeah. There's a past guest I've had on. His name is Steve Way, and he's an actor. A lot of his humor is kind of like that, you know, about like, he had this one video I thought was funny. He gets invited over to a girl's apartment, and he like travels all this long distance, and then he gets to the apartment, and there's no elevator. And that's kind of like the punchline. But again, it's like educational. It's education through humor, which is not your number one goal, but it's a plus.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I've sort of been educated myself a lot through this process, through the articles that have been submitted to us, because I only know my own experience of my own disability. And I sort of try to stay involved in the disability community and culture online, but there's only so much you can know, and I don't know nearly enough about any disability other than my own. So getting to have writers with all different disabilities has been really interesting in terms of learning different things. One example I can give, I don't think we have the article out yet, but one writer brought to me an article about sort of people confusing hearing aids versus cochlear implants for people who are deaf or hard of hearing.
Yeah.
And I thought they were different, but I didn't really know what the difference was. I didn't know how either of them worked. But for people who are deaf or hard of hearing, it's a really big sort of misconception and confusion among able-bodied people of which is which and how they work.
Yeah, definitely. And I can relate to that big time because, you know, like you said, we only are really familiar with ourselves. And when I started this podcast, you know, I was like, I could just talk to people with, you know, my eye condition. But then I was like, no, I'm interested in like everyone's perspective because I'm really into like adaptability and accessibility issues. And I'm just curious to see how people adapt to things. That's like, you know, mentally and physically. And through all of these guests I've had on, it's been a game changer for me just in terms of just learning and kind of soaking up other people's perspectives and lifestyles and, you know, mindsets and daily things that are involved in, you know, within their life. So yeah, I completely know what you're saying there.
Definitely. I'm going to sort of shout out another person here. I'm big on these recommendations and shout outs, but for anyone listening that wants to try and educate themselves and learn about sort of the array of disability, I cannot recommend highly enough the book Disability Visibility by Alice Swan. I'm not sure if you've come across it yourself, but it's a very successful book that came out last year. And I read it and it completely changed sort of my perspective and understanding of how different everyone's experience can be and how wide the spectrum of like what disability can mean to people. So really recommend that book.
Oh yeah, I'm not familiar at all, but I definitely will check it out because, you know, I'm trying to with that, what I just said, I said I've learned, but I'm still, man, I'll be honest with you, I'm still an idiot when it comes to this, you know, I have so much to learn. So like, yeah, I'll take any recommendation you can give me.
No, it's a great book.
Sweet.
It's sort of a collection of stories from a bunch of different disabled people. So it has a similar sort of format to your podcast where it's all different kinds of disabilities, learning different people's stories.
Okay. Yeah, I'll have to check that out for sure. But yeah, so it's interesting. You have all these different posts and different headlines. You yourself are a wheelchair user, so those probably are super familiar to you. You have one, it's called Three-Legged Veronica Cuddle Muffin, unable to climb podium, accept dog show prize. And the picture accompanying that is like a little Yorkie with her legs. I guess her back legs don't work, so she has the wheels. And then, you know, due to lack of accessibility, you know, I guess that's the point of it, is she's not able to accept her prize, which is to me is hilarious.
Yes, for sure. So definitely the idea of sort of spaces being inaccessible is not foreign to me, or probably a lot of the people listening to this. And like you said, a lot of these stories sort of come from my own experiences.
Yeah.
And then a lot of them are from our new writers who are giving me sort of their own personal experiences. We had a story that just went up last week about guide dogs can't use Google Maps.
Yeah.
Which is something that I knew nothing about. But as the writer had informed me, is that a lot of people who are visually impaired or blind, able-bodied people think that their guide dogs like know directions.
Yeah.
Like specifically know like how to search things online and just bring them exactly where to go.
Yeah.
And don't realize that the dog walker, the disabled person, the human, is the one that's actually navigating and sort of knows where they are.
Yeah, there's so much there's a huge learning gap, is basically the most simple way to put it, between most of the general public about, you know, this community. And I'm slowly closing that gap myself, but I still have a long ways to go. And yeah, it's just interesting what people can come up with or people assume. And I think a lot of that has to do with, you know, representation and TV and film, just what they see on TV. You know, if you don't know anyone, you know, if you don't know someone who's, you know, blind or visually impaired or a wheelchair user, then your only experience with that community is what you see on TV.
Yeah, I'm a big believer that TV and film has way more influence in our sort of everyday beliefs and stereotypes even than we realize. So absolutely getting sort of authentic representation on screen is the answer. And that's why we need people like Steve Ray to be given those opportunities on television to do big things and to show people that it's not necessarily what they think it might be to be disabled.
Definitely. I agree completely. And that kind of ties into one of these headlines I've written down. Emma Stone cast as Helen Keller in new Young Helen sitcom.
So yeah. That one I would say is definitely like one of the most absurd or silliest, and also feels terrifyingly close to something that could actually happen. Like in some way it feels so absurd. And then there was also 3 or 4 people that responded to it thinking it was real. So there really is no line between what people think is acceptable or unacceptable or possible or not possible. But there is sort of a history of able-bodied actors being cast to play disabled people and bringing a real inauthenticity to the role that makes it sort of silly to watch as a disabled person.
Yeah.
To watch someone try and perform disability on screen.
Yeah. No, I agree. It's it feels like it's slowly getting there, maybe not. I don't know.
I think it is. I think the last few years, and especially Netflix, has done a lot of really exciting sort of authentically cast content that put pressure on a lot of the other big media companies to make really good disabled stories authentically told. So I think it is getting better, but we're still a while to go.
Yeah, definitely. the picture for that one and for all of these, are you designing those? Because I know you're a designer.
So yes, I've sort of selected the images and curated them very carefully for all of these posts. I'm a big believer in sort of not using images that you don't have the rights to use. I try and source all my stuff that's sort of free to use and Creative Commons, and I've been fortunate that my background as a graphic designer has given me some good skills in sort of finding images that we can use, and I've been able to find some really good ones that fit our stories and even make a few of them.
Okay. Yeah, I'm sure you have to change some of them. Like, I'm sure this image didn't exist. It's the title of the headline of this post was "The Plastic Straw Ban, a Devastating Blow to Disabled Turtles." And in the picture, it's like a turtle trying to drink with a straw.
Absolutely. So that was a fun one to make.
Yeah.
But yeah, I've been able to put my my graphic designer hat on a little bit for this project and sort of make some of those fun images.
Yeah, the pictures are great. And going back a little bit, we were talking a little bit, I mentioned that you were a wheelchair user and you have a disability yourself, but I never asked you what specific disability you have, and I would love for you to share that with everyone. I think it would give them the listeners a little bit more background on your perspective.
Sure. So I have spinal muscular atrophy. If you're familiar with it, I have type 2, which is sort of the middle type, if you want to call it that, out of the three.
Okay.
It's a genetic neuromuscular disease. So I've had it since I was born. And it basically means all of my muscles are very weak. So I use a power wheelchair. I have a lot of assistance throughout the day from nurses and friends and my girlfriend and family, sort of to do physical tasks. But I try and live as independently as I can. And right now I'm living in the city with my girlfriend, and it's really trying to be independent with SMA is always a challenge, but really fulfilling.
Thanks for sharing that. And, because I was asking you, because, I'm sure there's a lot of people out there, who have, various disabilities or who are like interested in the creative field. Has anyone ever kind of tried to tell you shouldn't go in this route? Like, I feel like that's something common I hear.
I will say I'm very fortunate that my family was always really supportive of me going to college, getting my BFA, living on campus, moving into the city, things like that. But the closest thing I can say for that is I had a professor in college who sort of fairly, I'd say it was harsh but fair, pulled me aside after class one day and was like, look, if you're going into this field, like, you need to be prepared that people are going to discriminate against you, and you might have to work harder than everyone else just to be given the same opportunities as everyone else. And it was harsh and it was sort of hard to hear, but I think there is some truth in that the world still has a lot of catching up to do. So I encourage people with SMA and all kinds of disabilities to go into the careers that you want. You're going to have to work harder to get that sort of equal opportunity that other people won't have to work as hard for. But it doesn't mean it's impossible, and it makes it way more sort of fulfilling and gratifying when you can reach that level of success despite the discrimination that you face.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that perspective. I'm sure a lot of people listening will love that. And you're a designer for NBC Universal, and you have some very beautiful design work, by the way.
Thank you.
Would you mind if I shared your URL to your portfolio?
Oh, no, that's fair. StephenVerdile.com. I just renewed my...
You just renewed your Squarespace?
Just this morning, I renewed my Squarespace. Everyone go see it in the next year, because who knows if I'll buy it a year from now.
Yeah, for those listening, if you want to check out Steve's design work, just click the show description. I'll have a link there to his portfolio. And then also your Instagram account is Stephen Verdile Creative.
Yes.
Yeah, going back to what we were just talking about for in terms of, having a disability and what your professor said, pulling you aside, giving you, I guess you could call it some tough love, right?
Yep. It definitely came from a sort of a supportive place, but it was tough.
Has any of that been true? Have you faced any like accessibility issues or like, what I'm curious to hear about is like job interview process and like, are they done the same exact way, or do you ever get a sense that like, that something's going unsaid, or they want to ask you specific questions about your disability, or
Right. So I can speak to it a little bit. Sort of, fortunately for me, I sort of interviewed with NBC Universal way back as an intern when I was a junior in college, and I had no idea what to expect, how the interview was going to go. I sort of expected it to be awkward and weird and not go well, but I was wrong, and it went really well, and they really liked me. They sort of offered me the internship, very shortly after, and it's the only place I've worked since then. Okay. So I've sort of known different people. I've moved a few times throughout the company, but it's always been from a place of sort of one department can sort of get that information from my last department. And what I can say on that is that it's really helpful if you work for a large company, because they have those kind of resources for people with disabilities that they can offer you opportunities that smaller companies sometimes have more trouble offering.
Yeah, that's like good advice, but at the same time, it's like unfortunate that it's not across the board,
Oh, absolutely. I definitely have wanted to work places that I knew just were not an option.
But yeah. So yeah, accessibility and job interviews, because that's always something I'm fascinated with, because as a video editor with a visual impairment, I have never went to a job interview and like said anything about it, because I have like mine's pretty invisible. It's like
yes.
I'm not legally blind. I'm on the path to being legally blind. My mom is legally blind, and most people with retinitis pigmentosa, what I have, end up being legally blind. But I'm not there yet. And I still have a lot of central vision left. So I can edit, I can stare at a computer screen. But with that said, like, my peripheral vision's not the best, and I do have some blind spots in my central vision. So, if when in these office environments, I'll trip over tables or feet, or someone will try to hand me something from the side and I just won't see it. And little just like things like that. And, whenever I wasn't open about it, I had to like always come up with excuse. And my point is, I am getting to the point to where maybe I can't hide it anymore. So it's like I have to put it out there. So if I start interviewing, it's like what I find confusing is like, when do I bring that up? When I on the application, do I click? Do you have a disability? Do I check that box, or does that hurt my chances? Or, I don't know enough about it.
Yeah. So I've definitely had this conversation many times with other people with SMA and other disabled people about sort of, when do you disclose that you're disabled? How much information do you give? Does it hurt you? Things like that. And it's definitely a personal choice, and everyone does it different. There's no right or wrong way. But the one piece of advice I like to give on that is, when it does come time for you to sort of talk about it or tell them, I always find it more successful to tell them in the form of a question rather than sort of in the form of an announcement. Because if you say, oh, by the way, I'm disabled, it doesn't put them in a good spot to respond, because there's not really a great answer for that. So what I like to do is, what I did actually when I applied for the role at NBC, is I put in the email, by the way, I use a wheelchair. Can you please make sure that the location for the interview is wheelchair accessible? And I knew that this building is 90 stories tall. It's going to have an elevator. I knew it was accessible, but it was sort of just the idea of throwing it out there to let them know and to give them an opportunity to say, yep, we can handle that. Thanks for letting us know. And it sort of gets your information across without putting them in the spot that they need to respond with some awkward, like, oh, we're sorry to hear that, or like weird sort of disability announcement. I like the form of question better.
Great advice. I'll have to steal that from you.
Yeah, I'm sure you could find a way to work in your disability into something similar. Like, by the way, my vision is a little different, and can you make sure my desk is set up like this, or something like that. And even if it doesn't really matter if they do it or not, it just gives you a little aside to mention it.
Yeah, I think that's smooth. That's smooth. Helpful tips. I always, I try to be helpful on this podcast, and it's like, I want it to be entertaining, but I also want it to be helpful at the same time,
Of course.
Which, again, same with your content, the Squeaky Wheel. I don't want to overkill everything. I don't want to keep going through these headlines. That you got to read them for yourself. You got to go check out the website. You got to go check out the Instagram. Check out Steven's work. Steven, that's all I have to say about questions for you in regards to you and the Squeaky Wheel. But, I do have this format on this podcast where I end each episode where I let my guests give a shout out to a nonprofit or just any organization, charity that they want to put on people's radars that is some way or shape or another linked to the disability community. And I just wanted to know if you had something you wanted to bring up.
Sure. So the one I'm going to bring up is sort of probably not in the form of your normal responses, but I'm going to tell people when you see GoFundMes to donate to them, because I'm a big believer that when people start their personal GoFundMe campaigns, that it's the best way to directly give money to the people that directly need money. There's someone right now who I know is raising money for a wheelchair accessible van on GoFundMe, things like that. Give directly to people that need money. It seems sort of obvious, but so many times we try and think of how can I give to a charity that's then going to give money to people. Like, sometimes I think we overthink it. So my nonprofit is GoFundMe. Give money to people that need money.
Love it. Yeah, that's interesting. Cut out the middle-man,
Exactly.
I think there is some paranoia around GoFundMe sometimes. I think sometimes people are like, is this really where it's going to go? And it's funny because they don't think that about charities, when charities could be potentially doing the same thing,
Absolutely. I think also people get this idea that, like, oh, I've seen so many GoFundMes, like, they keep asking for money. But most likely, these are all different people. Like,
yeah.
It's not the same people that keep asking for money. It's different people that need it. And I believe that people that create those campaigns do it because they genuinely need things to live, and exactly where your money's going to.
Well, cool, man. That's an interesting perspective. You have a lot of interesting perspectives, and I really enjoyed getting to talk to you, and I look forward to following this Squeaky Wheel. I feel like I'm in on the I'm one of the first. I'll be able to say, like, I knew the Squeaky Wheel, when it just started. So I look forward to that.
Thank you for that. Thank you for having me. Everyone follow the Squeaky Wheel. And if you like jokes and you're disabled and want to write some funny stuff, email us.
Amazing. Yeah. If you're a writer and you want to try your hand at some, dry humor, hit up Steven.
Absolutely.
But I think we covered a lot, man, and I don't want to take up your whole night. But thanks again for coming on, and I'm really appreciative of your time, and I look forward to keeping in touch, man. Take care. And that's a wrap on episode 49. I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Steven as much as I did. I'm a huge fan of comedy and dry humor, and Steven's content for the Squeaky Wheel is right up my alley, so make sure to check it out. You can find the link in the show description. There you'll also find links to everything else Steven talked about. And again, thank you for listening. This is episode 49. I have a lot of cool changes coming to this podcast that you'll hear more about next week on episode 50. But before you go, make sure to follow or subscribe to this podcast on whatever platform you're listening on. That way you're the first to know about new episodes. And if you want to be the first to see any other content I make for this podcast, make sure to follow the podcast on social media. Again, the handle is @SeeThroughPod, and that works for Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok. I'm also on Facebook. And most importantly, I think this week is I want to draw attention to my YouTube channel, which I will be designating a lot of attention to coming up here shortly. So if you haven't subscribed there yet, please do. But that's all I have for this week's episode. And until next week's episode, stay transparent, everyone.